I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, April 16th. A press conference called by the Thunder Bay Police Chief and the chair of the police board took some interesting twists Monday, meant to address recent charges laid against a former chief of police and other members of the service. The event got caught up with an off-duty incident involving current chief Darcy Fleury. Fleury found himself explaining why he had to call police 3 times last week before getting backup. Then a lawyer representing members of the service also disrupted the event and walked out. On Friday, Ontario Provincial Police laid charges of obstruction and breach of trust against former Thunder Bay Police Chief Sylvie Hoth. It made her the 3rd service member to face charges as part of the same investigation. As for the new police chief and board chair, they hope the charges don't reflect poorly on the work they say is underway to regain trust and accountability.
At this stage, I'm not sure what I'm apologizing for. We need to go through these processes to see what happens, what the outcomes are. It's not a matter of it goes back to everything we're talking about. You can't just change overnight what has occurred in the past or what's perceived to have occurred in the past with a magic wand. So we have to go through the processes. Some of these processes are delayed because of procedures that have been filed, and that's just a matter of where that happens. So once that's all done, we'll take a look at where we are and make a determination on what needs to be next.
Lawyer Chantel Bryson, who represents numerous past and present members of the service, said the chief and board chair should be apologizing to those who brought concerns forward about the 3 individuals charged. Meanwhile, Anishinaabe Nation, or NAN, released a statement of its own Monday on the charges. It said, despite numerous reports, nothing has happened to enhance the public's trust in the Thunder Bay Police Service, adding issues plaguing the service are not resigned to history or the result of a few bad apples, but instead stem from systemic issues yet to be addressed. To Ottawa, where the past weeks have been tumultuous at the Native Women's Association of Canada. For one, NWAC has had a significant part of its budget slashed by the federal government. Then there were dozens of staff layoffs, something a complaint to the Public Service Alliance of Canada alleges was part of a union-busting campaign. And last Friday, the board of the national organization announced the departure of its CEO, Lynn Grew. Crystal Mariah Samaginis is a former NWAC employee. She believes Grew's time as CEO is why the organization has gone through a rough patch. Samaginis says she hopes the association can go back to meeting the needs of Indigenous women.
That's the most important thing, because when you have elitism or a disconnect, then your agency or your organization is no longer relevant to the people for which it's supposed to serve. And that's what's been happening in recent years, that there's been a serious disconnect. So now I hope there's, new relationships. I hope there's new networks. I hope there's new programs.
This week marks the latest United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The 23rd annual event will run for 2 weeks. Angel Moore is there and files this report on Day 1's proceedings.
I'm here in New York City. Behind me is the United Nations headquarters, where hundreds of Indigenous peoples from around the world have gathered in hopes that their concerns can be heard, including Ben Ausau Samuel from Sudan.
Because over the years we have seen Indigenous peoples lacking education, lacking cultural values, lacking certain kind of respect and recognition from our government and our society. And we have all come to agreement that it is high time we understand the importance of Indigenous people.
The forum was established as an advisory body for Indigenous peoples at the United Nations. This year, the focus includes financing Indigenous peoples to protect the planet and address climate change, including protecting Indigenous rights. This led Nicholas Paul to travel all the way down from Sisdansik, Wolastoqey Nation, New Brunswick. Paul says Canada is ignoring treaty rights, especially right now when First Nations fishers are being arrested for harvesting.
One of the topics here is the criminalization of Indigenous rights. So it's perfect timing. We want to bring attention to it, and we shouldn't have to go to court to make the government obey its own courts.
The forum also ensures the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights are implemented worldwide. Issues discussed in side events are scheduled for the rest of the week. Angel Moore, APTN National News, New York City.
Today is Federal Budget Day, and as Indigenous stakeholders get set to parse the numbers, Ottawa reporter Fraser Needham walks us through what they're looking for.
They committed basically $6 billion for both on and off reserve housing for Indigenous people in the last couple of budgets. And they haven't really given any indication that that's going to change. So I don't know there will be much new on that front. It certainly won't be anywhere the way the needs that have been expressed already by the Auditor General. And also the AFN put out that report last week on the First Nations infrastructure gap, which is, about $350 billion now to address it by 2030. So it's clear they're not going to make that target. So whatever they do pledge, it's not going to meet probably existing needs. I think the one new thing you may see there is more funding for a red dress alert. They put some money last year to sort of study it. There's been a lot of discussions. The government has sort of committed to that they're interested in putting some sort of system together. It's being studied in committee right now as to how that would work. But I think there may be some money for that because there's a lot of interest and a lot of people want to see that system put in place in Canada. I think we can definitely say it's going to be smaller. One reason is because last year they had the $23 billion child welfare settlement. So that was part of it. And also they've already committed to shaving off about $417 million in savings from both Crown Indigenous Relations and ISC in the next in the coming years. And also there's going to be about a $4.1 billion decrease in spending as some programs end. So one is the funding for Jordan's principal. Also, infrastructure funding is going to end, and the Inuit Child First initiative is also spending on that's going to end. So it's kind of difficult to say how this is all going to work out. I mean, the minister, Patty Haidu for IC, has said a number of times this is not going to affect services, that they're going to find savings, and then as these programs end in other areas like travel and attrition of employees. But not a lot of people have been convinced by that. So, but those are the programs that are supposed to sort of sunset in the next few years.
And finally, a First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island has just confirmed the existence of suspected unmarked graves at 2 different former residential schools. With more, Tina House. Note that aspects of this story may prove disturbing to some listeners.
The Ahousaht First Nation says they are now part of the growing list of First Nations in Canada to discover anomalies suspected to be unmarked graves at 2 former residential schools in their territory. The name of the search project is called We Are Still Standing.
Helping to breathe life back into so we could be who we were created to be.
Anne Atleo is the project manager.
We found more what you're referring to as anomalies in the cemetery there than as what is listed.
However, they are saying it's too early to release these numbers, and this is only phase 1 of the project.
And we may never find all of the children's remains. And because we're on islands, one of the very saddest pieces is that maybe some of their remains were brought to the ocean or brought to the lake at Christie. Because we're surrounded by water. Both of these schools were built on the islands that we live on.
First established in 1900 on Mears Island, the Christie Indian Residential School was closed in 1971. Ahousaht Indian Residential School opened on Flores Island in 1895 and closed in 1940. The experiences of the children who went to these schools was devastating for them and their families.
Language being quashed, diet, every aspect of our life was being taken away.
Kids from as far away as Washington State and northern BC were forced to attend both schools. The Ahousaht First Nation received money from the federal government and crowdfunding for the project. They also utilized 3 types of the latest technology for their ground search, but it was challenging to find accurate records.
We had a fair bit of records we were able to secure from the United Church. There was a lot of redacted information from the provincial archives, and we had some of the records from the oblates. It was a challenge. Now we've entered into agreements to access records that are not normally accessed by the public.
But for Anne and her team, listening to the oral evidence of those that survived these institutions was the hardest part of their work.
Really heartbreaking stories of hearing babies crying in the attic, heartbreaking stories of children taken to the lake and not brought back.
Phase 2 of the project begins in the next few weeks, and for the Ahousaht First Nation, they're determined to heal the past and remain strong while honoring their culture and traditions while uncovering the truth. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, April 16th. I'm Rick Harp.